Welcome to episode 10 of the Lily List podcast, where our goal is to be a handbook for the living. We chat with North Carolina artist Tom Troyer about his upbringing in the Wesleyan Church, the intersection of education and religion, how he transitioned to music full-time, and who he wants to leave his gear to when he dies. His latest album, The Silent Years by Farewell Friend, is now available and I would highly recommend it. You should see a link in the description of wherever you are presently listening to this episode. As always, visit lilylist.com for more information on the podcast and platform. You can also contact us from the website if you have questions or ideas for people or topics you'd like to hear or see on the platform. But just intro, Tom Troyer.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate your time, your talent. So I'm looking forward to you because you just put out a great album. We've been lucky enough to see the set both acoustically solo and also with the full band, which has been great. And I know that there's a lot of personal stuff behind that. I don't want to jump into that right away, but I think that there's a great story behind it. What I do like to start with is kind of going back to childhood. Where did you grow up and what were some of the impactful things that happened, say, coming up elementary school, middle school, high school, sort of childhood? What was kind of your experience and what were those few things that really you feel like put you on a path in life?
My dad is a now retired Wesleyan minister. And my mom was the piano player growing up. And I had, I think, two other uncles who were also Wesleyan pastors or missionaries. And at least another aunt who was also a piano or organist at the church. And my dad, my earliest memories of his ministry revolved around his work on a Christian camp. He had taken a few years between churches to be a caretaker at a Christian camp in Frankfort, Indiana. And my earliest memories are of climbing ladders with him to gather mulberries and like make a dessert, kind of thing. As a really little kid, being able to wander around this camp and kind of be kind of free to just do whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, before I can remember, some of the stories are of Tom just showing up like at the girls' dorm, like me as like a little, 3 and 4 year old just wandering around. I was like, oh, Tom's over here again, kind of thing. Like I was just wandering around and always kind of enjoying the freedom of like this huge yard that just happened to be a campground. And then other memories were of my grandma's camp in Canada. She and my grandpa ran a camp called All Tribes Camp, which was another Christian organization in Ontario. And we would go there for family reunions. And I just always loved the first memories that I have of my grandma. Was the kind of person who was always delegating, jobs to people. And no matter how old you were, she'd like, especially with family, it's like, okay, you're here, this is your vacation, but we're going to put you to work kind of person. So that I think that gave me a sense of like community and purpose within like kind of grassroots organizations. Because the Wesleyan Church itself isn't like, I don't know, what I now as an adult have kind of these tainted senses of like other organized religions and faith communities. Sometimes they seem much more corporate or blown out of proportion or have kind of lost their way because it's this kind of commercial enterprise. But my personal experience in those kind of faith organizations was always like, this is something that is helping to give people a sense of community and keeping people from like drug abuse and like helping keep families together and that sort of thing. Seeing how that played out from within the churches that my dad or my uncles or my grandma were a part of, those organizations. So that sense of community and how the church and faith work in rural, alienated communities, especially like in Indiana, where I'm from, or Ontario, where I spent some time growing up. So that sense of purpose is one of those things that was kind of early for me. We moved to North Carolina in 97, and that was devastating for the first 2 or 3 months that was the thing. And then by the time we got to North Carolina, and this was the summer between my 4th and 5th grade year of school, was, by the time we got to North Carolina, I was like, oh, this is beautiful. The weather's great. I love it. I really like, my cousins are great. I get to hang out with my cousins on my dad's side, and opened up my world in a different way from, my mom's side of the family that we had spent more time with. They were sort of a different flavor. It was a very different group of people. I don't know how to describe that side of the family in contrast to my dad's side of the family. It's just very different.
Yeah.
So that was a transition of like, oh, I have two sides of the same family and they're both very different, and kind of like navigating that and finding a different side of myself in opposition to that. Went to so in Davie County, there's just one high school, compared with however many there are in Guilford County. It's like, so the one high school serves both the sort of suburban Winston-Salem suburban sprawl of east side of Davie County, and then the Coolamy, more former textile mill, more impoverished side of Davie County. And so like I was really aware of that tension between the suburban college educated side of my friend group and then the other side that worked in the mill, or their mom and dad worked in the mill, but now those jobs had kind of dried up and now they're on welfare and mad at the world kind of things, and like kind of lack of hope. And the tension in that kind of was one of these things that I was always kind of aware of in my high school and thinking about where I fit in that. Being somebody who, my dad's college educated, but my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And we also, because my dad's a minister in small churches, like we didn't have expendable income, and we were always kind of hand to mouth in a lot of ways. But because of my dad's education, I think I kind of grew up with this sense of not being poor. Like that wasn't like how I viewed myself. And I, in high school, started to kind of become aware that like my friend group was always like much more well off than I was, but we got along just fine. And so I just kind of knew that had more to do with education and your sense of self and kind of confidence than it did with money.
I found there's a lexicon that you learn.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I find language really is what oftentimes separates us from each other.
Yeah. Lexicon definitely, like language definitely does a better job of connecting or giving us the opportunity to connect than high school is where I realized it's just like, I think language is the important thing, and that's how you can find your way through the world and find the people that, you resonate with, but all the other sort of external things are just like commercialism. And it's harder to stay on top of or stay in control of those things. Those things tend to control you more, right?
Sounds like you really had a grounding in community. I was always looking for a gang, a family, my own gang, somebody that saw the world the way I did. As I got older, it became clear to me, even playing in bands, I was looking for that family. I was looking for that gang, those people that saw the world the same way I did. And you banded together as like you against the world. That was really a driving force for me.
Yeah. That word now is like your tribe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that have become more aware of as like having a studio and being in bands that and really never really finding my wave up to this point. Like I haven't like had a huge following generate around my music, right? And not really having an idea and wondering like, okay, I'm going to play some shows with, you know, this jam band in the area, like Viva La Muerte, and like, oh, is that where I'm going to fit more? Is that audience going to receive my music and my lyrics a little bit more? Is that going to resonate there? Or, you know, playing in some more Southern rock circles, oh, is this going to be kind of what resonates, you know? And this tour also, like, I think I played with more punk bands than anything else. I'm kind of like being interested in, okay, how is that audience going to receive my songs? Or like, you know, I'm talking about grief and, you know, despair as it relates to losing my mom to cancer kind of thing. Like, is that the audience for that music? And, you know, now as a 37-year-old, I'm asking that question more about my tribe and my gang than I have in the past, I think, because I just, you know, music comes first and then you sort of figure those things out later. But yeah, I resonate with that.
Did you, so you mentioned, you know, music from a young age and piano in particular. So were you playing music from a very young age, or when did you start picking up instruments?
Remember singing songs and melodies that I didn't know where they came from. That was kind of the first inkling that I was a songwriter or that I wanted to sing. The first thing I told my mom as far as like, what do I want to be when I grow up, was that I wanted to be a singer.
Yeah.
And it was 5th grade in Indiana that you would pick an instrument and you'd learn that. And I picked a trumpet to be the instrument that I'd work on, because that's what my oldest brother, or both my older brothers, played trumpet. And I was going to just kind of keep doing that, you know. And then we moved to North Carolina. North Carolina didn't start music until the 7th grade. By the time 7th grade came around, I had picked up the flute from my cousins. I think it was my cousin Debbie's flute, or maybe they had just kind of passed it down through them. Anyway, I got a hand-me-down flute and was going to play that. And by the time 7th grade band came around, and I did that, and I think by high school, I realized that I should probably regain a little bit of the masculine and learn either bass or electric guitar. So I got a guitar and started learning that.
Going from, you know, that high school phase, looking for your tribe, did you go to college? Did you complete college? And then, whether you did or not, what was kind of that transition into adulthood like work? And, you know, I mean, I'm taking a guess that you weren't going from college to say, I'm going to go play music full time.
I went to college at a state school. So speaking of tribe and finding your group or whatnot, I was the black sheep in the family who did not go to the Christian university in Indiana. Like, my family have all gone to Indiana Wesleyan University since before it was even Indiana Wesleyan.
Yeah.
It was Marian College when I think my parents or grandparents were there. I can't remember which, but I decided that I didn't want to be saddled with the amount of debt that I'd seen both my brothers graduate with, and I wasn't confident enough that college itself was the path to the career I wanted. So much as I knew that college was the environment I wanted to be in. Like, I knew that I wanted to be in college. I just wasn't sure that it was going to lead to the kind of thing that I wanted to do. And when I went to UNCG, actually the most important thing in those years was being a part of a campus ministry. And not like Campus Crusade or any of the other ones that are like more affiliated internationally. I went and got into this group that were just like starting their own campus ministry. And it was very culty. It was very problematic for a few years in terms of just like how kind of aimless and heretical and overzealous it was. But I was just like so devoted to that like cause of ministry and sharing the gospel. And that was that was my group. That was my tribe. That was what I was like working towards and working on, and doing that like 3-4 nights a week, you know. Academics was kind of the easy thing for the most part because I was just studying history and I was just working towards being like a history teacher or a social studies teacher. And so that wasn't hard to kind of keep that all in check and say, okay, I'll teach, I'll graduate, I'll teach. I was already putting enough strain on my parents by going to a state school that to like say I was going to study music or something like that. Also, I think I knew that music would be more work than I wanted to put in to the major. I learned that was definitely the case pretty quick, and watching like other music majors burn out, and other friends that I had who were studying guitar or studying, you know, whatever it might be, burning out pretty quick in the music school because the UNCG music school is pretty challenging, pretty on point. So that was kind of my tribe, and the way that kind of progressed and continued outside of graduating with a bachelor in history is I instead of going straight into teaching full time, and instead of graduating with a Bachelor of Education, I opted to graduate only a semester late instead of 3. It would have been this thing where, I don't know, not to go too far down the rabbit trail here with this. I graduated ultimately with a master's in teaching English as a second language after still being able to take a semester off to substitute teach full time. And I did that faster than I would have if I had just gone to get an undergrad.
Wow.
Because of the timing of when UNCG School of Ed wants you to do your internships in student teaching. So that was kind of this pivotal moment where I took a semester off. I substitute taught at a Spanish immersion magnet school and taught PE, and kind of fell in love with that particular cohort of kids in that Spanish immersion program. Got along with them really well and decided, yeah, I'll go ahead. I'll teach instead of just kind of figuring it out from there with the undergrad in history.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I was in this band, this indie folk orchestral Americana stomp and holler group called The Collection. And I kind of helped launch that. And in that band, I'd play flute, didgeridoo, charango, mandolin, guitar, euphonium. Like anything that they needed me to play, I was like...
It's all the normal stuff.
All the normal stuff, you know. And it was a band with like... We would tour with 12 people.
Yeah.
We'd play hometown shows with like 16 people on stage kind of thing. It was always this huge fiasco, and it's beautiful, or, you know, just crazy experience to play live with that group. And that definitely kept me in music and wanting to figure out how I could get to that point, you know, going on a couple tours during summer breaks or winter breaks with that band, like definitely inspired me to imagine a life where I wasn't a teacher, but I was on the road touring and playing music. That band was successful to a point also that it gave me a sense of like being confident in music. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I could do that. Like I was a part of that. I could maybe do that myself with my songs someday. So that was about the time I started putting out my own EPs as Farewell Friend. David from The Collection mixed and mastered a couple of those first EPs and helped kind of push me out of the nest and learn my own like way as a producer and sort of gradual release kind of thing. You know, we talk about in teaching is scaffolding and gradual release of stuff. You know, I learned one part at a time with each EP that I did. So 2017, I put all those together on one album called Lineage, added 2 more songs, start and finish kind of thing. And 2017, I quit teaching. I was burned out on teaching by that point. I had tried finding other teaching jobs. I had interviewed at different places. I had just completely kind of beat my head against the wall trying to find my way as an educator and had just decided it was time to do something different.
Was that due to kind of the systemic issues of teaching, or was there something else going on?
Early on, I felt a lot of despair for the first couple of years of teaching, thinking that I felt culpable. I felt like I was complicit in a systemic wrong or evil. Like it definitely seemed that kind of thing to me. On the outside looking in, I think I can easily say that my heart wasn't in it also.
Yeah.
So it's kind of easy when when you can't, well, it's sour grapes, right? It's like, it's sour grapes. It's like, I can't be good at something. I don't feel like I fit. And so like everything's broken, everything's bad, and instead of like sort of committing to it. But there's always this dissonance between like the work I knew I was doing in school, feeling like so much of that work is I'm a part of a bad machine. I'm a part of like almost like a pipeline to prison. That's how it felt like. So that was the kind of thing that really jaded me. And I was happy to get out in 2017 and start to figure out the complexities of the music industry at that point and figure out if there ever would be a kind of place for me and where it would be, what road I wanted to take.
Yeah.
Because, it's like if you decide you want to be a full-time musician, it's hard to know exactly what that's going to look like. So you say, oh, well, maybe I'll be a studio guitarist, or maybe I'll tour, or maybe I'll just play covers, and what am I going to be most passionate about? And so the first few years was just sort of seeing what opportunities there were out there at that kind of time.
I think that's, we can take that as the next step to where you are today. But before that, you've mentioned this thread of religion from when you were born all the way through college. Mm-hmm. I'm curious about your view on your own journey of religion. You mentioned being very much heavily sort of committed to it in college. And, you also mentioned being the goth to the Grateful Dead in high school. I'm curious kind of your path with that, what it's meant to you from kid to say teen to adult. Are there places where you've stepped away from it and come back to it and kind of what it means to you today?
The song from this album, Good for the Garden, is the best sort of summary that I can say as to how I felt like over the pandemic, or maybe the last 3-4 years of my life, and how I felt about faith is kind of a frustration and a disenchantment to a degree. Oh, we're burning it down again. I'm relearning my laugh, I'm resetting again, and being okay with that and saying, okay, well, maybe that really is what faith looks like, is being willing to rework it and willing to retool, I guess, for lack of a better term, and figure out that at least in how I still believe in God and believe in the Western Christian evangelical ideas of religion and faith, the way that I still relate to that. They got harder to say by the time I got to the word evangelical, I guess. It's easier to talk about God. It's easier to talk about Jesus. It's easier to talk about faith and spiritual hope than it is lately to talk about what evangelical in quotes means, I was explaining it last night to my wife. I was coming around to this thesis that I think is, the There Will Be Blood kind of thesis around religion in American context, which it's just so perfect an analogy for right now, especially thinking you have this charismatic oil guy, this tycoon is just trying to get land so he can sell oil and be successful.
The pipeline.
Yeah, and the pipeline. And, forgets that Jesus had to leave Israel and be a refugee in Egypt and come back. It forgets that there was that kind of wandering, exile, illegal narrative in the New Testament. It'll forget all that, you know, and it's because crude is the lifeblood of the evangelical church right now, and that like oil is the thing, and that's to me, it's on it. Hearing these words come out of my mouth right now are more like this feeling of, you know, I feel like a paranoid kind of crazy dude, you know, making those kind of connections. But I don't know. I have those kinds of qualms that I don't have the time to really unpack that. And it isn't like Joy last night, what my wife was saying, it's like, you need to write an essay about that. And I was so mad when she said that, because she's always like, you need to finish this album about that. So I was like, no, I'm not going to also put out essays. I don't have the time to be an academic on that level. And besides, There Will Be Blood was a movie that came out decades ago, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't need to beat that to a pulp at this point. And that dissonance that I feel has still pushed me into my small group and into a church now that does still have the values of, you are put in a place to serve the people in that place, you know? And I'm a part of a church that I believe is doing that. And I gather with friends weekly who are bought into that, as they also don't hold me to strict parameters on the kinds of people that I have to associate with, which is also one of the things that, like, that's kind of a rule that that's something I don't want to get from the church, is I don't want them to tell me who not to be with, who not to minister to, or who not to be friends with, because that's always been a thing for me. It's like, I'm going to be friends with the weirdos. I'm going to be friends with the people who don't fit in. The people are kind of like walking up to the edge of the abyss themselves and asking all the questions. Like, those are the people that I want to be around. And, you know, a lot of churches are more about like creating a dress code, creating a way of thinking, creating a lexicon.
Yeah.
And then using that to alienate people. And that's the kind of thing I don't want to be a part of.
So it sounds to me, thinking about that sort of, I sort of hear there's like faith, acceptance, community, coming back to community again, but faith, acceptance, I know there's all the stuff you just said about religion, all the things we talk about, faith, acceptance, community. I'm curious, knowing the album that you just put out, what you've been pushing out there. I mean, this is heavily, I'm not even going to say influenced. I mean, it sounds to me like this was really your mother was kind of the, I don't know, focus. You can correct me on this when you talk about it, but the focus on your mother and her impact on you and how you took that and then created this album. I don't know. I know obviously she was part of the sort of church and things growing up in these communities. But, what was her views? Does kind of where you are today align with maybe some of the things that she was thinking about? And then what was that journey like with you losing her and then actually going and making this creative output around that? Like, what was that journey like to do that?
I guess two things. I'll try to talk about, sometimes it's been other artists who've helped me unpack or interpret what it is that this album is saying. And then other times it's been family who have been able to they'll listen and they'll say, oh, this is what's going on here.
Yeah.
And those will hit real hard. Those will help me a lot, For one instance, Matt Armstrong from Viva, he's a very good writer, a very strong writer. He does that for a living and he teaches. So he's been kind enough to write a couple of reviews. He wrote a review for Samson, and he wrote the review for, he wrote my one sheet for the Silent Years. And my favorite thing that he said from it was he was pointing out that this is about a family breaking down. This is an album talking about the tension and the rift that exists in the family, and surprisingly like the rift that we see in America, right now. And that was very much exactly what I kind of curated the songs around, is that rift, or the silence, the stuff that we're not willing to, or we know if we do go there over Thanksgiving dinner, we know it's just going to end badly. It's the things we're not supposed to say, but I do. And then, we regret it, kind of things that you keep silent, for me, those things have added up. And the silence that I remember seeing in my mom, and the way that she would avoid topics, or the things that I just knew not to say around her, were the things that we fought about, that the silence that built up itself, over the years, needed to actually be talked about, needed to be unpacked. And even if it wasn't perfectly eloquent, even if it wasn't comprehensive, even if it wasn't canonical or didn't fit the dogma, or what the church would want me to talk about, even if it alienated or lost Instagram follow, you've got to just start saying what it is. You've got to open up the floodgates, and there's going to be some good stuff and some bad stuff that comes from that, and just be willing to say, well, that's what being an adult is. We've got to start talking, because I think Samson was another one of those where there was some things on that album that I was afraid to have family listen to, in a way. But my Aunt Bev, who was a preacher's kid growing up, and then she'd moved from, I think, Pennsylvania to Indiana. And so she said, stranger in a strange land. That's what you're dealing with, and that I just wept as soon as she said that. I was just like, that's exactly what that is. And I hadn't put it that concisely, And as far as the art goes, is my mom left us so much art and these Zentangles, these doodles that she did, this world she created, these worlds that she kind of created within her art. You look at them and you don't know what they are. They're what's that psychological term? They're ink blots, Like, people see different things in them, and I don't know if she saw anything in them, or if she did, what was it, sort of thing. And I think that's what's great about art, is you can put it out there and people can interpret it the way that they will. And for her, it was kind of an escape, it was a way to kind of shut down the world around her and be able to kind of calm herself and have a way to vacate, So the silent years can mean a lot of different things. It can mean the times that we weren't talking and now we need to, or we've said everything there is and now we need to just be quiet.
Yeah.
So it's both ends of that. You said the podcast originally was going to be around what do you do before you die, or
sort of like end of life planning of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things for me was like, just learning to use the hours that I could spend with my mom, because we live in North Carolina. She lived in Indiana. We'd see each other on holidays. And it was learning over the last few years that I have hours left. I have days left, and to really treat those a kind of way, to be willing to have the fights. And then to also make sure to make up by the end of that trip, and never leave with the tension still hanging there, or the bad blood still simmering, that was part of that. And so I think that the kind of music I'm putting out with this album is about giving myself that same time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cognitive dissonance that I deal with personally. There's a lot of tension. I'm not fully in this Zen place where I've got it all figured out clearly, and I'm happy to, or I'm better off for having those arguments with myself. and going through the tension and the release of that, and then the resolve that comes with it.
Yeah, acceptance, I think. It's a lot of people talk about acceptance and believe they have it, but there's so many people I know who will say, well, I don't agree, but, we can still get along. But at the end of the day, the one thing I've learned is that for 99% of us, at least in my opinion, we agree more than we disagree when it comes to the important things about life, what we want out of life, what we want out of life for other people. And that true acceptance is that, look, you see the world different than I do, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. And we can have conversations, we can have disagreements. At the end of the day, though, we got to get along. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, so many of the fears around our social entanglements or community or tribe or gang that we're in, so much of the fear is of like losing our place or being left out in cold. And is really helpful to look at that anthropologically, as a teacher, to kind of study that and then come back to it and think about it in terms of biologically, did we have evolved to be afraid of being shunned and sent out into the cold, and losing our place in the tribe because that meant death.
Yeah.
Like to be unaccepted or unfriended is death.
Yeah.
And we still carry that fear, although that's, in this day and age, clearly kind of irrational fear. And we have to kind of rest in knowing, okay, we can be let out of the group and we're going to be okay.
Yeah. It's irrational for now. We'll see what the future holds. But I think that anthropological view, that gets me to the next part is legacy. And I say it every episode on this podcast, and I don't mean to beat it into the ground, but legacy is so much more than, financial.
So to work my way backwards through some of the things that you just said, I found out now a year and a half, 2 years ago that I can't have my own biological kids.
Okay.
And that's because of a genetic deletion of some kind. It's a rare disease, or it's just a missing piece of the code. I don't know how to call it, and I can't remember the specifics. I just don't make sperm. To it. Otherwise, I'm a bearded white dude who, has enough muscle mass to, work a job where I climb poles and stuff. So I guess I'm manly enough to, still kind of present in a kind of way. But it's caused me some relief to a degree to know that this is one of the reasons behind why I kind of feel different from people. I don't feel like I fit in some ways. Most of my best friends over the years have always been women, and I feel like I just kind of operate more on that frequency to a degree than I do with like my dude friends. I don't know. I'll try to get back to the legacy thing.
No.
But yeah, the interesting thing that was able to happen is like I've been able to look at gender differently, and find kind of a fulfillment in realizing like they talk about it not just being green and blue, but then they'll show, there's a million shades to both those colors, and kind of gender and my own expression of that has been one of these things lately that's been really good to find sort of a scientific basis for my own particular experience in gender as it relates to that. And that legacy, as I've gone through that path of finding out that I can't have kids and realizing that my idea of fatherhood looks very different, right?
Yep.
Than it does easily from most people or most men. So I grew up with a babysitter in my family circle, Dave O'Neill, who also just didn't have kids, but he worked as a father. He operated as a father in numerous families that were like either his nieces and nephews or cousins' kids, or to me and my brothers and my sister. And I didn't know until I was like 18 years or so that like he'd had an accident. He was unable to have kids. And that was kind of like why he was the way he was.
Yeah.
So in terms of like my legacy as quote unquote father, or parenthetically father or whatever, it took me a few weeks to kind of connect the dots and realize that I did have someone in my life or in my history like Dave O'Neill who also kind of walked that path. Because for a few days or weeks, it was really hard. It was really depressing to realize that I didn't have like a role model. I didn't know what was ahead. I didn't have an example. I didn't have sort of like a North Star. Like if I'm not going to be a dad in the way that my dad was, who do I have? And Dave O'Neill was that kind of individual in my mind who I could say, I can be that goofball uncle. I can be that guy who, when my friends' kids need somebody to talk to, or need some help fixing their car, I know I can offer that kind of help. I can help them in that way. And it's been really good to be an uncle.
Yeah.
And that's one of those legacy pieces. This year, we were able to go to Ontario. I piled into a tiny little Ford Fiesta with my dad and my two siblings, Tim and Sharon, who both have special needs, developmental delay also. They will always need help just with day-to-day survival. And we piled into a Ford Fiesta and fought the whole way from Frankfort, Indiana to Ontario. And I have an album that someday I will put out. It will be a very Andy Schaaf style album about that drive. It was just comedy and nonsense the whole way, and just wanted to kill each other the whole way. That was the sort of thing. But legacy, we made it up to the camp that my grandma Millie founded and then ran. And my grandpa, when he married her, he lived as a caretaker on that camp. And I had the best cry going down into the cafeteria of the lodge and seeing the people who took over the camp. We're there to be there for her burial. Her memorial, her ashes were being buried on the camp. They'd put off the memorial because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I had missed her funeral in Marion, Indiana. I'd missed that because of the pandemic. And so it was good to be there and say goodbye and be in that space and see how unchanged it is. Like the camp has very much honored like the world that she created and the space that she built for the community there. And it was so good to see like just even the chairs and the tables in the cafeteria, and the kitchen is still set up the same way.
Yeah.
And I could still go into that kitchen. I could cook something, and know where everything was.
Yeah.
And then go up into the lodge that she had very much put together as a space that is just very beautifully honors like Native American and Native Canadian traditions as well as Christian traditions, and is a space for like both those things to operate in a very balanced and very harmonious kind of way. And then to be in the cabin where I stayed in my 2 weeks that I got to go stay, because they always invite the cousins and kids to come up and stay and help live on the camp and volunteer and do stuff. And I had my 2 weeks. I think I was the last of the cousins that got to do that before my dad or my grandpa passed away. To be in their cabin and see the books where we were and pick up my grandma's memoir that she'd written and read through pages of that with my brother. It very much occurred to me that like that's the kind of legacy that I want to leave. Is I don't know if it's building a camp or if it's building a venue or if it's being a part of a church that I get to help build or whatnot. But that creating a space, like space is very important to me. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's one of the things that's been hardest about being a part of different churches as an adult. And then leaving those churches or those churches dissolve or being in bands and those bands move on or whatnot, or it's always very important to me to be working towards a space and building a space and building something that lasts beyond my time on earth.
Yeah.
And that's one of the hard things about being 37 is like, I just don't feel tied to a space in that kind of same way, you know? So I don't know. That's one of the things I think about. And I think about it in terms of my time helping out at Glendon Fest, you know, and like helping out with Laura Jane and the tribe that she has, you know, Glendon, because that's a house that part of it was built like back in the 1770s, and then like other parts of it, you know, have been built and added on since, and it's this just glorious old this mansion or shack, whatever you want to call it. You know, it's like the front porch jams that we have twice a year. Like that's just a really beautiful thing to be a part of, and I always feel like that's home. You know?
Yeah.
And Doodad Farm is a similar kind of thing. I'm less affiliated there, but that always feels like you know, Dean Driver has a thing going there that's really beautiful. I love seeing that space and the community that's around that. So those are always the things that are kind of like on my mind of what am I a part of? What am I building that is a place where all kinds of weirdos can go and figure it out together.
Yeah, no, that's great. But I interviewed Mishka Shubali, who also doesn't have children, and he had a great line where he said he's figured out that the world doesn't need more parents, the world needs more cool uncles. You know, may or may not align with everyone's beliefs, but, you know, in his tribe, that's what's important, and so that's what he's sort of focused on, so I get that. To finish up, I ask this of everyone, and I don't know if you'd be shocked or not. Most people have answered the same way. But so legacy is one thing, and then we also live in a world. I always tell people I didn't create this world; I was just dropped into it. So we live in a legal world. We live in a capitalist world, and there's legal things that need to happen. So when it comes to wills and medical proxies and all of that good stuff that all of us should have filled out so that those of us that we leave behind aren't having to make those decisions. Where are you at with that stuff in your life? Do you have a will? Do you have your medical directions documented?
The medical directions. I know where I want to be buried, or rather, I want my ashes to be left or distributed. I've communicated that to my wife, but I also intend to make sure and show a number of people exactly the place and have them take a picture. Like I want to make very specific and very well known my intent to be cremated and my ashes thrown over the edge of the cliff at Wilson's Creek or Harper's Creek Falls.
Okay, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I've got that spot. I go there 2 or 3 times a year, so people
Nice.
will know that. But and that's actually the space that I'm talking about in the formula.
Yeah.
It's like my camping buddies know. My personal hang up with that is a bit of a feeling of that I just don't, whether I do or don't, I feel like I don't have a very complex estate.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I should write it down as far as where the instruments go. But I think that if I had to, if this document right now, this podcast had to be like my last will and testament, because this could be that, you know, think about it.
That's funny. This is the second time that I've gone through this with a guest.
And they say that.
Well, one of the JT who you met, he said, you know, I get time, and he said, you know, if I die, people know it. And I said, what if you don't die? What if you're in a coma? And he said, well, they know not to leave me on machines and stuff. And I said, well, we'll use this as documentation for that. So,
yeah, we'll use this as documentation for that. All right. Okay, so Phil Garman gets the Martin.
this is everything seems very simple when we think about it in the abstract.
Yeah. Galen Clark can have the Strat.
Well,
so cool. Yeah. Prepare the will. That's what I'm gonna.
I'll send you some links.
Some links.
May or may not find them useful, but it's at least something to start with. But yeah, so okay, well I appreciate your time. I'll get some links, when we release this, I'll stick them down in the thing. You're not going to get a massive bump from this podcast, but we get a few hundred people that tune in, so there'll be a few people that go away.
You can't hang on to yourself. You don't have to try not to hang on to yourself. It can't be done, and that is salvation. The most important thing for anyone to realize is that you and every person you see will soon be dead.